Asmat Guru Bhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Guru Bhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Guru Bhyo Namaha. So we're going to continue on with our discussion of Yatindramata Dipika, which is the light on the system of Ramanuja. And as I said in the first session, this book, in English, we have two editions of it. So we went through the whole preface of the edition by Adi Devananda of the Ramakrishna Mission, which is the updated one, I believe, 1949 or something like that. And then we have another one, I think 1902 or 1912 by Alkondavili Govindacharya. So we're going to look at the preface by Alkondavili Govindacharya now, and after that we'll see if we get into the actual book itself. The preface and introduction are quite long for him. So let's just have a look at the table of contents here that he has. So the way Alkondavili Govindacharya does it is he talks about works that other works that he's written. This was right after the English king and queen had visited India, and at that time they were all under the British Raj. So he, says something about that, and then he has his preface, and then he goes into the different avatars. The chapters of Yatindramata Dipika are called avatars. So they're all different chapters. So it starts off with perception and inference and sabda, the word, then about matter, time, the spiritual universe, attributive consciousness, the soul, God, non-substance, and a conclusion. The transliteration system that he uses here is one that was adopted by the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland, which is called JRAS for short, and except that he uses, except for SH for some reason, whatever it is. Anyway, and then he says that it or he is used for God and the soul. She also could be used. So he's just saying something about pronouns that are used. The gender is inconsequential according to him. Okay, so continue on the preface. So the preface, he starts out and he says, the appearance of this work was adumbrated in the Arta Panchika, or Five Truths, in the pages of the Journal of Royal Asiatic Society in July 1910, page 565, which we can find actually his article on Arta Panchika, which is also another book by Pillai Lokacharya. And that's a nice thing to read. So in that article, he mentions about Yatindramata Dipika, and so now he decided to put out Yatindramata Dipika also. It was to have appeared in the same journal, but for paucity of space, for a work extending over more than 45 pages, it was decided, therefore, to bring out an independent edition in India, which, as a book of reference for all time on the Vishishtadvaita philosophy and religion, is expected to be more accommodating to the general reader than if it appeared in an academic journal inaccessible to all. Being an academic work itself, the printing of it in propria forma, demanded by the exigencies of Samskrita orthography, was made possible by the Maikandan Press under the supervision of its intelligent proprietor, Mr. J.N. Ramanathan of Madras, undertaking to meet all the requirements incidental to such a work. It is hoped the readers will find the justness of my remarks when they may come to examine it for themselves. Okay, in the shape of introduction to the work, very little need be written. It seems to me, inasmuch as scholars are more in need of original matter than attempts made at theses, for which there seems at present no warranty. But if a popular introduction were yet deemed necessary, my work, called the Vade Mecum of Vedanta, affords an appropriate for parlor, yet some of these words are very archaic English words, for parlor, to the Yatindramata Dipika. So there, he has another work which you can also read, which is an introduction to Vedanta. The work which, with this preface, makes its debut in the arena, into the arena of Indology, the necessity also for such preliminaries is as far as possible obviated by the copious footnotes, which will be found sprinkled in sufficient profusion in almost every page, not only to elucidate the abstruse subject matter, but as well as reduce to the utmost minimum the Jeju nature, which is a sine qua non of all academic studies, the Oriental in a large measure. The desideratum for a specific glossary of technical terms, which by necessity teem in all works of an academic nature, is met by the scheme adopted in this work of inditing all such terms side by side, their English in brackets or otherwise. Okay, so that's good. So he's all the terms, all the technical jargon, he's also going to give an English translation of, and he's sometimes going to put them in brackets, the technical terms or the English, I'm not sure which. Facilities for comprehension are better afforded, I trust, by this mode than if they had been procured by constant references to a glossary at the sacrifice of time, with mental poise liable to be ruffled by such a process of glossarial interference at every step of a perusal. In other words, he wants to save your time, but not going to the glossary, to have a glossary, and to be able to have to keep going to the glossary to search out jargon. So he's going to put it right in the text, which is good. I totally agree with that. Strictus fidelity to the original Samskrita might, it is feared, have led to the English rendering being rather stiff and in places lacking peradventure in clarity. But this is due more to the technical nature of the subject than to any perfunctoriness on the part of the translator, who is conscious of having done his best. So he's just making excuses for the fact that it's a very technical work. That's fine. The subject itself is rigid and invites the mental concentration of the student, not the surface skimming of a light reader. Okay, so his third point here is, he says, with regard to the author of Yatindramata Dipika, Srinivasa, this will be interesting, we learn from the invocatory verses left untranslated, which we have translated in the other edition, were mention of Mahacharya in the preliminary of Advent 1. Advent 1, I think he's the chapters are called avatars in Sanskrit, and he's translated that as Advent. So the first chapter, in the preliminary of the first chapter, synonymously referred to again as Gana Guruvara in the colophon, is made that he, that is Srinivasa, the author, right, is the immediate disciple of Dodayarya, which is the colloquial, right, of Maha-Arya, which is the same as Mahacharya. So Mahacharya. There's a succession of apostles of the Ramanuja school, beginning with Dasarati or Mudlianda. So remember that Ramanuja had two main disciples, Kurudal I and Mudlianda. So that is Kuresh and Dasarati. Sri Ramanuja's sister's son, right? Ramanuja's sister's son. So he was actually a nephew of Ramanuja, famed as of the Kandadai descent. So he comes in this family called Kandadai. To this stem, belong all the Mahacharyas, a branch, an important one, settling down in Gatikachala, right? Usually the word Gatika has to do with time. Gatika is a measurement of time, as far as I know. Anyway, Gatikachala is otherwise known as Chola Simhapuram, vulgarized as Solingur, right? Which is a station on the railway track linking Bangalore, right? Bangalore with Madras, right? So there's a station called Solingur, right? And they have it's Chola Simhapuram. Cholam is the name of the area of the country, right? There was a Chola kingdom, and Simha it refers to the deity of that place, which is Lord Narasimha. So, which is referred to by Srinivasa, the author of Yatindramata Dipika, as Gatika Adri, right? So Gatika Achala, Adri and Achala mean mountain. Okay, so Gatika hill or Gatika mountain in his invocatory verse of the work. So he's saying, here's my Acharya, this is and this is the lineage that I come in, and he's also saying, this is the place that I live in. This place is a noted shrine, very ancient, as having been sung by the archaic Alwars or Dravida saints. In their Tamil works, the Prabandhas. Narasimha is one of the 10 avatars of Vishnu, being the presiding deity of the place. One of the Mahacharyas is noted in history as Chanda-Maruta Mahacharya. Chanda-Maruta. Now, Chanda-Maruta means hurricane. Okay? So Chanda-Maruta Mahacharya. So there's this one Acharya who was called Hurricane because he was so, his preaching was against Mayavada, against Advaita Vedanta, was so, was like a storm, So is noted in history as Chanda-Maruta Mahacharya by reason of a great polemical work called Chanda-Maruta. Okay, so he wrote a book, actually, called Hurricane, having been written by him on an anterior work, the Satadushani, of a similar character composed by the great Vedantacharya, 1268 AC or CE, right, born. We're talking about Vedanta Deshika. Vedanta Deshika wrote a book called Shatadushani, which basically is 100 mistakes that 100 errors that the Advaitins make. And so based on that book, which is an older book, this Chanda-Maruta Mahacharya wrote a book called Chanda-Maruta, or Hurricane, who is a contemporary of Madhavacharya, or Madhava, is an Advaitin, and Vidyaranya. Vidyaranya was in 1331 CE, right, after Christ, right, elected the Sringeri pontiff in the now Mysore state. So Sringeri, which is up in the mountains, the Western Ghats of Karnataka, right? Sringeri is one of the seats of one of the four main seats of the Shankaracharyas. And so this Madhavacharya or Vidyaranya was elected the Sringeri pontiff. He was made the head of that mutt in 1331. So the author mentions in the conclusion chapter both these works, among others, as those on which he bases his compendium of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, that is the Yatindramata Dipika. So he's basing Yatindramata Dipika. The author Srinivasa is mentioning in the last chapter, conclusion chapter of Yatindramata Dipika, he's mentioning his having gone through this Chanda-Maruta hurricane by his Acharya, and also the Satadushani by Vedanta Deshika. As he's just mentioning like a bibliography of the books that he consulted when he made the Yatindramata Dipika. Hence, it may be reasonably conjectured that Srinivasa is the immediate disciple of Gatikachala Chandramutta Mahacharya, right? So Gatikachala is the place where he's from. Chanda-Maruta means hurricane because he wrote a book called Hurricane. and Mahacharya because he comes in that particular lineage coming from Mudliyandan or Dasarati, which they were known as Mahacharyas. Okay. So this Mahacharya is the contemporary of Apaya Dikshita. Now, these are all names of people that you haven't heard of maybe before, but Vidyaranya, Madhavacharya, Apaya Dikshita, these people are famous Advaitins. And therefore, Vedanta Deshika we've heard of the Vaishnavas, but let's also understand when these people were living. So here he's going to talk about this particular Mahacharya, who's his guru, this Chandramutta Mahacharya from Katikachala, is a contemporary of Apaya Dikshita, who is a commentator on Vedantacharya's works. So Apaya Dikshita is a Shaivite and also an Advaitin, and he commented on Vedanta Deshika's works. So he wrote books trying to refute Vedanta Deshika and trying to show the supremacy of Shiva and the supremacy of Advaita over Vishishta Advaita Vaishnavism. So a tradition in currency further confirms this contemporaneity, which may be cited here in almost the words kindly supplied to me by my valued friend, Sri M.T. Narasimha Iyengar, BAMRAS, professor of Central College in Bangalore. So his friend said these two authors, Mahacharya and Apaya Dikshita, were close friends, both being unparalleled vidvans, right, pundits or intellectuals of the age. And they used to discuss philosophical questions very often with a view to try their skill in argument. So they used to argue philosophical points back and forth, as people do, but one was a Vaishnava and one was a Advaitin. Okay, so both were admirers of Vedantacharya. So even though Apaya Dikshita has written many books against the works of Vedantacharya or Vedanta Deshika, whose works they commented largely, right? So both of them have admired the works of Vedanta Deshika and quoted his works often. But of course, from the Vaishnava point of view, they quote them. This Mahacharya quoted him, and Apaya Dikshita quoted him from the Shaiva Advaita point of view in order to defeat them or refute them. So Apaya Dikshita, as is well known by all Sanskrit scholars, was a staunch devotee of Shiva, in spite of his having devoted his time to writing commentaries on the Vishishtadvaitic works of Vedantacharya, Vedanta Deshika, and he wanted to construe the term Narayana as applicable to his favorite deity, Shiva. So this is the thing. They want to interpret the word Narayana to mean Shiva, right? So just like sometimes Vaishnavas will say, well, the words Ganesha, the names Ganesha, the names Shiva, the names Durga, these all come in Vishnu Sahasranam. So these are all actually names of Vishnu. They're names of Perumal. They're names of Shiva Narayana. So in the similar way, you have Shaivites and you have these Advaitins. They want to say, he wanted to say that because there are many good arguments as to why Narayana is the supreme and et cetera, et cetera. So if we just simply, instead of trying to refute those arguments, we can just simply say, oh, the word Narayana actually means Shiva. So this is the point, that there are many commentaries and things by this Apaya Dikshita where he tries to show that the word Narayana means Shiva, because Shiva was his favorite deity. So Mahacharya, seeing his friend, attempted a point for argument that could not at all be maintained on a grammatical basis at most, waited for an opportunity to test the truth of his friend's conviction on the point in question. This is a very interesting story. So this Mahacharya, being a Vaishnava, he wanted to know, is this guy, this Advaitin Shaivite, who's my colleague, my friend, does he actually believe that the word Narayana indicates Shiva? Or is he just arguing it for argument's sake? So this is what he wanted to know. So he was looking for a way to test that. How are you going to test that? How are you going to know exactly what the guy is thinking? Is he really thinking that the word Narayana could mean Shiva? So he once, when they were both getting up the Alagar Malai, okay, so just outside Madurai, there's a temple called Alagarkoil. Alagarkoil is short for Alagia, right? There's a Alagia means beautiful in Tamil. So it's a beautiful, Malai means also hill, like Dipika, like Chala and Adri, right? It also means hill. So there's this hill, which is sacred to both Vishnu and to Murugan, actually, to Kartikeya and Skanda, and they were going there to this temple, and there's the temple is Sundaraja Perumal. It's a very famous temple, Vaikanasa temple, and they were both going to that place, right, together for some reason. Maybe he wanted to see Vishnu, Mahacharya wanted to see the Vishnu there, and this Vedanta Deshika wanted to see the Apaya Dikshita wanted to see Murugan or whatever it is like that. Once when they were getting to that place, once when they were getting up to the Alagar Malai, about 8 miles from Madurai, on which the temple of Sundarabahu or Alagar is situated. Right. So there's a footnote here that says there's a verse which is alleged to have been uttered by him in a meeting of pundits in Kanchipuram. The gist of the verse is that he saw no distinction between Shiva and Vishnu, yet he had a penchant for Vishnu. For Shiva. Apaya Dikshita had a penchant for Shiva. So they were, and where the famous Nupura Ganga still runs. So there's a stream up there on the hill, which you can go and bathe in, which is apparently a sacred tirtha for Kartikeya. And Mahacharya took advantage of a position where he could extract the truth of his friend Apaya Dikshita's conviction on the disputed point from his own mouth. So he wanted to find a way to get him to admit. He wanted to find a way to get him to admit that his arguments that Narayana means Shiva were just arguments and that he didn't really believe them. Because there was no way grammatically, or there was very little evidence that Apaya Dikshita had for this interpretation of the word Narayana as Shiva. So among the initial steps leading up to the temple of Sundarabahu, Aligarh, in the temple of Vishnu, the 18th step from the bottom is regarded as presided over by a Bhuta or a spirit, named in Tamil as Karapan. So there's this legend there that there's a Bhuta or a spirit that resides on this 18th step of this temple, right? So and there's a belief that whoever speaks an untruth or a lie or proves false, right, while on this step would suffer instantaneous death. Okay, so everybody believes this, right? That if you stand on that step and you say a lie, this Buddha will kill you. You'll be killed by this spirit, right? Who rules the place, right? That step. Okay, so if you want to test somebody's veracity, or if you want to test some truth, if you want to test somebody's saying something, and you don't think it's truth, you get them to stand on that step, and then you ask them, okay, is that true or not? It's like a lie detector. So Mahacharya and both Apaya Dikshita, they both knew this, right? So when they were going to this temple, Mahacharya thought, I'm going to get him on this step, and I'm going to ask him, does he really think that Narayana means Shiva? So it is for this reason that the temple keys used to be left during nights on this step without any fear of thieves touching them. So the archakas, they don't live inside, the pujaris are not living in the temple. What they do is they perform the worship of the deity in the day, and at night they lock the temple with the keys. Then they used to leave the keys on this step because they know that everybody will be afraid of the spirit that rules this step, and nobody will take the keys for fear of being killed by the spirit. So I saw a similar thing in Ahobilam. Ahobilam, the deity of Prahlad Narasimha, which is in Lower Ahobilam. They have a temple of they have a shrine to Hanuman, which is just opposite the entrance to the temple. And up until a few decades ago, the pujaris used to lock the temple and they used to leave the keys with Hanuman. They used to leave the keys with Hanuman right in front because I don't know if anybody's ever seen, but in South India they have these huge wooden doors on temples, and they have these big metal locks in the doors. And so the keys are quite big. The keys can be big and heavy. So the archakas, they don't want to carry the keys to their house every day, so they deposit them in front of Hanuman, or in this case, they deposit them on this 18th step leading up to the temple. And because there's a curse on this step, nobody will take the keys from that place. So anyway, but today probably people are not so much interested in the curse or don't believe in the curse, so they don't do that anymore. But in the ancient times, they used to do that. Even up until quite modern times, people used to have a fear of these things, of Hanuman or of this particular spirit, guarding the keys. So here, Mahacharya took hold of his friend's hand. So he got him onto this 18th step, and he took hold of Apayadikshita's hand, and making him stand on that step, questioned him, "Tell me, my dear friend, are you really convinced that the term Narayana can be construed as a name of Shiva?" Right? Because he knows that he's on this 18th step, and he knows if he lies, he'll be struck down by this spirit. That's the legend, right? So I ask you now, because you cannot speak untruth here for the sake of argument. So he understood that Apayadikshita was an argumentative type of guy, and he wanted to have debates and arguments. But he said, okay, here you cannot say a falsehood here just for the point of argument. You have to tell the truth. Then Apayadikshita is said, this is the story, is said to have spoken out his own conviction to this effect, right? So here he is, in Apayadikshita's own words, he is said to have said this, right, in this story. Of course, obviously, Advaitins today will probably deny this story. This is a Vaishnava story. The letter N, the cerebral letter Ra, na, in the term Narayana, right, is in the way of such construction. This is my conviction, right? So he said, because that cerebral letter N is there in the term Narayana, I don't actually have a good reason to believe that Narayana is Shiva, means Shiva. This is my conviction. So Apayadikshita actually accedes to this confession, right? So let's say we're telling this story, and there's a bunch of Shaivites and Advaitins, and they say, no, we don't believe this. We don't believe this story like that. Okay, there's actually in writing, Apayadikshita has said the same thing in writing. So Apayadikshita concedes to his confession beyond grammatical reasons merely in his commentary on the 35th verse of Ananda Lahari, right, which is a book by Adi Shankaracharya, right? Apayadikshita writes a commentary on that, right? And in his 35th verse, in the purport, in the commentary, he actually says that he says the same thing. So we not only have this story, but we have it in writing that Apayadikshita could not maintain forcefully that the meaning of the word Narayana is Shiva. So this great Apayadikshita's date is correctly known as 1552 to 1624. Right, so this is quite late, long time after Ramanuja, long time after Vedanta Deshika. Okay, so this is the time period we're talking about for the Acharya of Srinivasa who wrote Yatindramata Dipika, as proved by various evidences, such as 1, his living in Vellore under the patronage of Chinnabomma Bhupala, who was a chieftain of that area, I guess. 2, his being invited to the court of Penukonda, the Penukonda ruler Venkatadev, 1586 to 1613. 3, his being the Vedanta teacher of the great grammarian Bhattoji Dikshita, So there was a great grammarian who wrote a commentary on the Astajai called Siddhanta Komedi, and his name was Bhattoji Dikshita. Okay, so he was apparently the Vedanta teacher of that grammarian. Now it says in the footnote here, it's going into some more detail here. This is actually the confession of Apaya Dikshita that Narayana cannot mean Shiva. And it comes from the edition of the Ananda Lahari commentary printed by Vani Vilas, which is a very famous press in Sri Rangam. And he's given the transliteration here, and he's also explained what it means, right? So he says, the gist of this passage is that his head will shatter into hundreds of fragments if he dared to gainsay the verdict of all the great sages, Vyasa, Parasara, etc., about Narayana being the great God in all their authoritative works, that he dare not commit such blasphemy or heresy or blasphemy. So even Apaya Dikshita, he says, I can't go against the verdict of Vyasa and Parasara, saying that Narayana is supreme and everything like. Even Adi Shankaracharya in his Gita Bhasya says Narayana Paravyak, that Narayana is supreme, is above all the other gods. So even Apaya Dikshita, great Advaitin and follower of Shiva, right, had to admit that. So, and for his antagonism to the famous poet Jagannath Pandit or Pandit Raya, the author of Chitramimamsa Kandana. Chitramimamsa Kandana. Mamamsa means discussion or deliberation. Chitra means picture, and Kandana means breaking. So there's probably a book called Chitramimamsa, and then there's a refutation of that book by this person called a Kandana of that book. Okay, so we can therefore conclude that Mahacharya, who by tradition was equally old as Apaya Dikshita, while in Aligarh Malai, while the Aligarh Malai or Aligarh Koil incident took place, as chronicled above, lived in the latter part of the 16th or the beginning of the 17th centuries. So the 1500s and the beginning of the 1600s. So our author Srinivasa, who's remember the disciple of this Mahacharya, this Gatikachala Hurricane Chandra Maruta Mahacharya, right? Therefore, the author Srinivasa, therefore, who is the son of Swami Pushkarini Govindarya, right? And when we see Govindarya, we can think Govindacharya, right? That would be a colloquial way of saying Govindacharya. So Govindarya. Swami Pushkarini is, of course, the tank, the temple tank next to the temple of Tirupati in Tirumala, right? In Tirumala. So his father, Srinivasa's father, was called Swami Pushkarini Govindarya, servitor of the holy hill Venkatagiri. Again, Giri means a hill. Venkata means Lord Venkateshwara, and that is Tirupati. And a disciple and disciple of Mahacharya may be placed at the end of the 17th, at the beginning of the 17th century. So right in the beginning of the 17th century or the 1600s, right? That's when we place Srinivasa. So we have all these evidences to understand exactly who Srinivasa was, what lineage he was attached to, where he lived, and at exactly what time he lived. So point number 4. This author of Yatindramata Dipika had, according to the invocatory verse, a vision where he saw Venkateshwara, the god of Tirupati, Devaraj, the god of Karishaila, right, Kanchi, right, in Kanchipuram, Devaraj or Variraj Perumal, which is the main deity in the Vishnu Kanchi, which is Little Kanchi. There's Big Kanchi and Little Kanchi. Big Kanchi is Shiva Kanchi, Little Kanchi is Vishnu Kanchi, and in Vishnu Kanchi there's the town is basically cut in two, and most of the Shaivites live on one side, most of the Vaishnavas live on the other side. So that place in Kanchipuram is also the deity of Devaraj or Varadaraja is up on a little bit of a hill, a little bit of a mountain. So when you go in the temple, that you have to climb up steps to go and have darshan. And actually, below the deity of Varadaraja is another deity of Narasimha in an underground sort of cave-like deity room. Okay, so anyway, so Srinivasa had a vision of Lord Venkateshwara. He had a vision of Devaraj, and he had a vision of Narasimha, the god, the main god at the place where he lived, or Gatikadri, along with Krishna, right? And in brackets he's put here, you could be equaling Yamunacharya. So Yamunacharya was also called Krishna. That was the name of Yamunacharya. So it's a little bit unclear here whether he had also a vision of Krishna or the Lord Krishna, or it was Yamunacharya and Yatiraja Ramanuja. So all of these people came in a vision to Srinivasa, and that seems to have been the inspiration quickening him to the composition of an authoritative textbook embodying in it all the quintessence of doctrines of Vishishtadvaita philosophy and religion promulgated by Sri Ramanuja, which he fitly titles as Yatindramata Dipika, the light of the school of Ramanuja. So he got this inspiration by a vision. So he had a mystic vision, and these deities and acharyas came to him, and he was inspired, therefore, to write this book. Right? When was it? In the beginning of the 1600s or the 17th century. So, as works original, then commentaries, and then theses over against these became multiplied, right? So from the very beginning of any sampradaya, we get basic works, and then we get commentaries on the works, and then we get books putting forward certain doctrines from the works, and then we get counter books from other sampradayas and other people countering the claims of those particular doctrines. So you get a huge amount of literature built up, commentary literature built up over and above the original works. So by the time the 17th century or the 1600s came around, there were a lot of books explaining about Sri Vaishnavism and giving commentaries on the basic texts of Sri Vaishnavism. There were also many books by the Advaitins and even the Madhvas and things like that, written against certain doctrines of Sri Vaishnavism. So there was so much to look at, and this happened also in Vedanta, where the Sutra period of India, right? The Sutra period came in, and there was everything needed to be put in very, very short form. So here, because Srinivasa, he saw that there was a lot to study. There were too many books to study. Let's put it that way. And there was just not enough time in one lifetime to read all the commentaries and to study in detail all of these different books. So what he did, what happened is he and so vast it to be beyond the range of a clear conspectus of the subject matter necessary for a compendia arose. Necessity for a compendia arose. So he decided he had to make a small, short, clear book on the basics, right? So that people could just read that, and then that would help them through a lot, instead of reading so many other books. If they wanted to go into detail into any particular doctrine or commentary, they could, but he wanted something simple, short, and to the point. Of such is the Yatindramata Dipika, which purports to be a manual devised in order to present a lucid outline of Vishishtadvaita philosophy and religion based on the voluminous literature extant, right? Which, most of which the author Srinivasa mentions by name in the conclusion chapter. So he mentions all of the works that he took inspiration from and he took quotes from to make his Yatindramata Dipika. And that's very important that he should quote the other previous commentaries and the previous works, because it shows also pramana that he's not just making up his ideas, but he is setting down that his ideas are set down in short and very sublime way, right? the understanding of the previous acharyas in the lineage. Voluminous literature extent, most of which the author mentions in his concluding chapter. Right. So I have inserted in brackets against these works the names of these authors. So when we get to the last chapter, we'll see the names of the author, the names of the works, and also the names of the different authors. And his sixth point here is, as handbooks were thus desiderated for original works, English renderings of such seem to be in requisition in the modern days of acute Oriental research. So he, of course, lived, in the early 20th century, Alkonda Govindacharya. And so at that time, and even before that time, during the British Raj, and when the foreigners from Europe had come into an understanding and tried to understand about Indology, it became very popular to translate works of the Sanskrit works and other vernacular works also, right, into English, so that Oriental scholars would have an access to this knowledge. So the East and West are daily being brought into closer bonds. So that's his idea. His idea is that because of Western scholarship into India, that this should be put into English. So this inspired him to Alkonda Govindacharya to translate this book. A memorable epoch of this process has just transpired, with King George V of Britain having crowned himself with his august consort, Queen Mary, on Indian soil in Delhi. So the King of England came to India. If you go to Mumbai, you can see the Mumbai Gate, the Gate of India, which is right down near the harbour where the King of England came, and he crowned himself emperor of his empire in India. In Delhi, and so he's mentioning that. And it doesn't seem like this Alkonda Govindacharya was really against that. He was a monarchist. It seems like it. So Rishi Parasarya is giving an account of the kings of the future in his Vishnu Purana. Okay, so Alkonda Govindacharya has read Vishnu Purana, right? And he quotes from the fourth canto, 24th chapter, 55th verse of Vishnu Purana about the King of England visiting India. Interesting, right? Which would hold sway over India. He gives the Sanskrit transliteration here, and says this, in his opinion, this particular verse indicates the King of England that came and crowned himself Emperor of India. The word Kainkila in the first line of sloka has never been noticed as another variant by the learned edition of Wilson's Vishnu Purana. This so he okay, it's a variant. So this word Kainkila, right? He takes that word Kainkila to mean, in his mind, in my mind, it sounds very much like Angila. So Angila is, of course, the word for English, for the English. They call them Angila. Angrezis in Hindi, they call them Angrezis English, or Angila. Angila is also a name. So Kainkila Yagavas then to us are English people, right? So that this is the way Alkonda Govindacharya he interprets that word in Vishnu Purana to mean English. So they would rule, he further tells us, without wearing the crowns. Amurda Bishikta. This is considered by the Hindus as unorthodox or unnormal. George V, coronating himself in India, then is an event which restores to the Hindus its own notions and sentiments of what properly constitutes sovereigns ought to be. The Murda Bishikta. May not the Rishi's prophecy point to the necessity of real crowned heads establishing themselves in India instead of uncrowned vice regents being permitted to fulfill royal functions, right? So the way the British ruled India is that the king didn't actually live in Delhi, the king lived in England, and he had a viceroy, and the viceroy was there. So that viceroy is the uncrowned ruler of India, right? So no literary work written during this coronation epoch could hence launch out into the world without chronicling this world event. So he feels that this is a big event that King George came and crowned himself in Delhi. And an event conspiring to unite East and West in closer bonds of love for cooperative work in future. So you can see this Alkonda Billy Govindacharya, he was really a monarchist. He really felt that King George V coming to India and crowning himself emperor was a good thing. And he felt that this would bring about closer bonds between the East and the West. This is fostered by literary works of the East presented to the West in Western garb. So he thought he wanted to help with this cooperative idea with East and West. So he decided to translate Yatindramata Dipika. My present attempt is one more of this description. So our task is to translate ancient knowledge into modern equivalents. We have to clothe the old strength in a new form. The new form without that old strength is nothing but a mockery. Almost equally foolish is the savage anachronism of all old-time power without fit expression. Spiritually, intellectually, there is no undertaking, but we must attempt it. Okay, and so this was a saying by a person called Sister Nivedita. If anybody knows anything about the Theosophical Society in Madras at the time, which still there, but Theosophical Society, and Sister Nivedita was a spiritualist, alias Margaret E. Noble. Okay, so continuing on. Also, it is significant to note that this work is being sent out on its career. The government of India has resolved to take practical steps to encourage Oriental learning, judging from the Blue Book just published of the transactions of the Conference of Orientalists held in Simla, which is up in the Himalayas, right? Last July, where the British used to go during the heat of the summer. They would go up to Simla. Under the presidentship of Sir S. Harcourt Butler, CSI, CIE, member of the Council for Education. Okay, so that was a very interesting sort of little aside there that gives us an understanding of where the translator of this work is at, and how he thought of the British and how he thought of the British rule. So anyway, 7, 3 editions of Yatindramata Dipika have come to my knowledge. So now he's saying he had 3 editions with him, from which he made his translation. So the first one published by the Vedanta Vidya Vilas Press in Madras in 1868 in Telugu script, Telugu characters. The second one published by Vidya Tarangini Press in Mysore in 1896, also in Telugu script, right? The third one is the edition is the Pune Ananda Ashrama. Pune means in Maharashtra, Pune. Ananda Ashram series, number 50, 1906, with a commentary by Vasudeva Shastri in Devanagari script. Varai Lectiones is almost nil. So he's saying basically the difference in these editions is almost nil. So when we see different editions of the same book being printed, it means that there are different manuscripts and the scribes have made some differences and things like that. But all in all, he says that these 3 editions that he looked at, there was hardly any difference. But A good addition, along with English translation, seems a future contingency. The author has divided the work into 10 avatars. So that these different chapters in the book are called avatars, right? So he mentions down here also in the footnote, he mentions that about this idea of having perhaps a translation of the like a critical edition of these three manuscripts. He says here, there are two karakas or versified works treating the same subject matter which came to his notice. Okay, so he also has found some other works which treated the same sort of matter, and they are the Vedanta Karakavali by Venkatarya and the Yatindra Siddhanta Sangraha by Sri Shaila Acharya. And these were printed by Vidya Tarangini Press in Mysore. So it's just a footnote. So the author has divided the work into 10 avatars or incarnations in allusion to the fact of Vishnu Narayana's 10 incarnations. Conforming with this sentiment, I have adopted the equivalent term Advent. So he translated the word avatar to Advent, which is nice. Advent is a much better word than incarnation, right? So when the Lord descends, avatarati means to descend in Sanskrit. So when he descends, it's called an avatar. An avatar is an advent. He advents himself. He shows up. To mean sections or chapters. Okay, so he's used the word advent. So first advent, second advent, first chapter, second chapter. So as I stated above, the work, being academic, is rather rigid. I would therefore recommend the reader to begin from the fourth advent to the end, Prameya part, the end of Prameya, and then turn back to the first three advents, the Pramana part. So there's two things. There's a Pramana and the Prameya. Prameya means what is to be proven, and the Pramana is how you prove it, right? So he says, read the last part of the book first, and then go back, because it's so boring. You should start at chapter 4, read the whole book, and then go back to the first three chapters, which are boring, which are about Pramana. So some people would agree with this, but our translator himself says that. I don't think we're going to do that. Well, what we probably, unless that's the way you want to do it, but normally people just go through it chapter by chapter. But he is saying, since it's such a rigid work, he suggests that you start with chapter 4 and go to the end, and then come back and do the first 3 chapters last. In any case, the copious notes supplied will, it is hoped, lead to a clear comprehension of the otherwise intricate windings of the Vishishtadvaita philosophy and religion. So his 8th point here in the preface is, finally, okay, I have to note that this addition to the Orientalia was finished on the 2nd of February 1912, an auspicious day on which a great festival was held in Melkote Hill, which is otherwise known as Tirunarayanapura, 36 miles north of Mysore, right, in honor of Sri Ramanuja, having discovered the holy image of Narayana, overgrown with jungle and anthills, under the asterism of Purnavasu. So right under the star of Purnavasu. So this is probably even celebrated today. This festival where Ramanuja found the deity in Melkote, which had been hidden because of the ravages of the Mughal invasions. So some deities were buried and some deities were hidden, so that the iconoclasts, the Muslims who were iconoclasts and don't like deities, they break deities, so wouldn't be able to find the deity. So when Ramanuja went there, he was in exile from Sri Rangam because of the activities of the Shaivite king, Krimikanta Chola in Tanjore. So Ramanuja went there and he was in exile for about 16 years. And he stayed there in Melkote. And when he first went there, he found tilak available there in the ground. And he also found this deity and reinstalled him in the temple. And also he ended up going to Delhi to get the Utsava deity, the small metal festival deity, which is now there also. So by accident or providence, it is difficult for the small wits of man to divine, right? Reverend J.N. Farquhar of the YMCA Calcutta came just now for the first time to Mysore, and in his address to the public in the Wesleyan Mission School Hall began with the preliminary that what attracted him to the place was neither woodland nor river scene, neither Darya Dowlats nor Tipu's tombs. Darya Dowlats, I'm not exactly sure what Darya Dowlats means, but Tipu's tombs. There was a sultan called Tipu Sultan of the area in Mysore, and next to Mysore there's a small island on the river Kaveri near Mysore called Srirangapatnam, and that was the headquarters of this sultan. And there's also a Ranganath deity there, and they say that this Tipu Sultan could speak to Lord Ranganatha, so he was a great devotee of Lord Ranganatha, even though he was a Muslim. And this Tipu Sultan was the last person to fight against the British when the British were, conquering and making peace treaties with different Maharajas in India. So he actually captured and tortured some British officers of the British Army, but finally he was betrayed in some way, and the British gained entry to this island fortress that he had and killed him. So if you go there today, you can see the Ranganath Temple, you can see the place where Tipu Sultan was killed, and you can see the secret gate that the British came through, which was a gate down by the river for the people in the city to get water while they were under siege, and like that. So that's also very close to Melkote. So if you go to Mysore, you can see that. And then just close to that, next to that, down by the Kaveri, there's a place where they've built a tomb for this Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan also has in Bangalore even, he has a wooden palace, which you can go and visit. So anyway, that's enough about Tipu Sultan. But the Tipu Sultan's tombs is there in Mysore, so you can go and see it. But that great, so in other words, what the author is saying here, what Al-Kondavati Govindacharya is saying was this Reverend Farquhar of the YMCA in Calcutta, when he came to Mysore, he said in his speech that he wasn't really interested in all these other sightseeing places like Tipu's tombs, but what he was interested in was Ramanuja. So, but that great Ramanuja who appeared 10 centuries ago in this land, giving to men a great spiritual message. So that's what he was attracted to. He was attracted to Ramanuja, and so obviously Melkote coming to Mysore. On the day referred to, 2nd of February, right, the Reverend gentleman, true to his announcement, was closeted with me for nearly 2 hours in conversation connected with Sri Ramanuja, and he incidentally referred to the lack of the ethical conception of God in Vedanta. But I told him that the keynote of Ramanuja's teachings was preeminently that. So this Reverend Farquhar of the YMCA in Calcutta, he was 2 hours discussing with Al-Kondavati Govindacharya on the 2nd of February, 1910, 1912, 1910, I think. Anyway, so he was for 2 hours with Al-Kondavati Govindacharya, and he said that he had studied Vedanta, this Westerner, and he just felt, he felt that the Vedanta needed some sort of ethical concept, of God, and it didn't have that. It didn't seem to have that according to him. And then Al-Kondavati Govindacharya explained to him, no, you haven't understood about Ramanuja. Ramanuja's teachings definitely preeminently have that ethical conception of God. So this was the very point also, as I discovered, he had already put in print in his primer on Hinduism. So this guy this Reverend was also an author, and he'd written a book called Primer on Hinduism, which maybe we can find sometime, where he says that in the Vedanta philosophy, there's one fatal omission, that Brahman is not conceived as holy. We are nowhere told that Brahman is righteous. Hinduism remains from first to last crippled because the idea of God was never moralized, right? So this was this guy's idea until he came across Ramanuja's philosophy. It is unfortunate that Reverend Farquhar committed himself thus too soon before he met Alkondavilli Govindacharya, for he would have made quite a contrary statement if he had written his primer after his South Indian tour, right? So the footnote here says, combining this event with the coronation event and the swelling body of Orientalia, read what Justice M.G. Ranade prophesied in 1901. That is, the hand of God in history is but dimly seen by those who cannot recognize in the contact of European with Eastern thought a higher possibility for the future of both races. Already the morning dawn is upon us, and we can see glimpses of the bright future reflected in our ability to know and appreciate each other's strength and excellence. This is from his book, Philosophy of Theism. So you can see that the Oriental scholars, the English Oriental scholars, they had a very great appreciation for Vedanta, and they also had a great appreciation for Ramanuja. So for close acquaintance with Ramanuja would have startled him, in other words, the Reverend Farquhar of the YMCA in Calcutta, by his exposition of a most ethical and loving as well as sublime and exalted God, as surpasseth all notions of similar character that may be found enshrined in other scriptures of the earth. So that's the point that Alkondavilli Govindacharya was making to this reverend, that Ramanuja's ideas on God, right, show him to be much more ethical, much more loving, much more sublime, and much more exalted, and surpassing all the nature, all the qualities shown in other scriptures, like the Quran or the Bible, or any of these other scriptures of the earth. Unfortunately, such appellations of deity connoting his highly ethical character seem to have escaped that is the reverend's notice, right? So these are the qualities which somehow escape this reverend, which are there in the scriptures, but he seemed to have missed them in his discovery and his research on Hinduism. And these are Dharma, Satya, Punya, Pavana, Pavitra, Bhuta, Suchi, Shuddha, Shiva, Hari, Kalyana, Amala, Apahata Papma, Heya, Pratyanika, Nishkalanka, Antaryamin, Bhagawan, right? We just have to look at, for instance, Ramanuja's works like the Sri Sharanagati Gadya, and we'll see, and even the Sri Bhashya, it starts out, yes, also the Sri Bhashya, it starts out with a big long list of all the Ananta Kalyana Gunas, the unlimited wonderful qualities, the unlimited auspicious qualities of the Supreme Lord, right? This ethical concept is in fact the cardinal, salient, momentous feature of the Vedanta that constitutes Ramanuja's Evangel to mankind. So we have a footnote here. This means, right, these Sanskrit words that I've just mentioned, this means that God, immanent in nature and man, meaning thereby the holy guide or ghost, right, as in Christianity they say Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, right? So the ghost meaning Brahman, right? If that word is more endearing, right? So if the Christians like to use the word holy guide or Holy Ghost, right, for Brahman, they can, is what he's saying, if that's a better term for them. Who, as Justice Ranade puts it, is the divine reality regulating the purposes of law and order, beauty, benevolence, power, and wisdom. Right. So then we have this word Bhagawan, and the footnote on that says, see the significations of the last term, Bhagawan, discussed in the pages of the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, right, for 1910, 1911, 1912, one scholar called Dr. Schrader, who later, this is a German scholar, firmly holding that it means essentially holy. Right. So Dr. Schrader had already done this, had already written on this. Dr. Schrader was in Madras, and he was a German scholar, and he was actually interned in India during World War One, because, of course, the British were fighting against the Germans. And he wrote this very famous book, Introduction to Pancharatra and the Arthabhutnya Samhita, which you can get, Dr. Schrader. It's a standard textbook on Pancharatra. Okay, so continuing on like that. So this ethical concept is, in fact, the cardinal, salient, momentous feature of the Vedanta that constitutes Ramanuja's evangel to mankind. His ninth point here, even though he said the eighth point was going to be the last one, he has another point here. Christianity, no doubt, derives its conception of God from Semitic Judaism, right? So we have these Abrahamic religions, otherwise called Semitic religions. Judaism, first of all, chronologically, then Christianity, then Islam, right? These all three have a common scripture, have common scriptures, the Old Testament, and to a certain extent, the New Testament. For the last two. So, but it ought not to forget its fons et origo, right? Its origin, remote in the midst of ages. That is the Aryan or Vedic Brahmanism. So what Alkondavilli Govindacharya is saying, although these Semitic religions or Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they have their scriptures and they have their tradition, but they should not also forget that in the midst of ancient days, they also have gotten some things from the Aryan or Vedic Brahmanism, right? In the light of ethnographic, philologic, geologic, and archaeologic, right? Archaeologic knowledge, right? The research for which we are doing, right? Which were done by the Orientalists, made available by Orientalists in this late age of enlightenment and enlarged horizon, neither to gain nor glory does it redound to ignore the world-old traditions common to the Indo-European race. So he's saying that there's a common ancestry here to the Indo-European race. The outlook is now so wide that it is time the narrow bounds of Hebraism, to which Christianity tenaciously clinged itself, should be overleaped. The East invites all men to unite. Even as George V is crowned in India, the universal religion of all humanity is destined to be crowned here. Right? So this is what he's saying. He's pointing out, trying to say that Ramanuja's philosophy is universal and everybody should accept it, even the Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Right? It is here meet to recall Sri Partha Yogi's proposal to Dr. Miller in Madras to call his college not Christian. There's a Christian college in different parts of India, a place called Christian College. Okay, but Universal Religious College. But Dr. Miller could only heave a sigh and no more. Okay, so he's just saying that, therefore, what we suggest people, even Westerners and Easterners, should unite together under this universal philosophy of Ramanuja. The Science of Religions by Emil Burnoff is a bracing revelation on this theme. Dr. Deussen, even without his reaching as far as Ramanuja, says that there is not in the Bible, this venerable book, being not yet quite free of Semitic realism, but it is in the Veda, and that the Vedanta in its unfalsified form is the strongest support of pure morality. Okay, and so the footnote here also says, see his Indian reminiscences. Max Mueller, in his lectures on Vedanta, has shown the high ethical standard of Vedanta, implication in the doctrine of karma, with which the Christian church impugns to the detriment of all ethics, right? So even though Christianity doesn't accept karma, it should, because it is to the detriment of all ethics that people give up the idea of karma. reducing God to the sorry predicament of a capricious, partial, and cruel tyrant, violating as such all essentials of ethics, right? The Vedantic deity, on the other hand, Max Muller shows, embraces the deities of all other religions, or of all other religions. Okay, so unless God were ethical, Vedanta could not, as it doth sermon on morality. Vain again were its teachings of the immanency of spirit. Did it not mean a life of holiness to have to spring from it? Any other opinion betokens shortness of insight and slenderness of scholarship in South Indian law. Even if the ethical idea were germinal in the Veda, it receives its complete expression in Ramanuja. So we have a footnote here. So even the cold light of logical Tyndall confesses, P.C. Mazumdar, that life came from the East once before and it must come again. That's in 1874, he wrote that. So even these Western scholars, when they came to India, they were so impressed by the Vedanta, even more so by Ramanuja's philosophy. So about Ramanuja says, that such a worldwide book of ethics, the Bhagavad Gita, should have escaped the notice of such an earnest and sympathetic missionary as Reverend J.N. Farquhar, which he talked to for 2 hours, right, in Mysore, who is from the YMCA in Calcutta. A fault venial in the bygone centuries, but not in this 20th century, passes our understanding. So he cannot understand it. Al-Kondavili Vindachari, he just couldn't understand how this Farquhar could have not read the Bhagavad Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita is full of ethics. It's full of morality. It's full of dharma, right? Okay, so nor will Hinduism in the least countenance such ethics of the Christian church as eternal damnation for petty sin or eternal salvation for petty virtue, right? So if we look from the point of view of Hinduism, or from at least from Ramanuja's Sampradaya, how can it be that there's eternal damnation for a petty sin, or eternal salvation for some petty virtue? Both determined indeed by the infinitesimal lifespan of man on earth, because they don't believe in reincarnation, right? And projecting him for the nonce into eternity for the good or worse, heedless of the ends of justice. The soul, ego itself, is an ethical entity in Vedanta, not sinful as Christianity insists. So the basic theory of the Abrahamic religions and the Semitic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is that the soul is inherently sinful, coming from Genesis, from the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve committed the sin of eating the apple of knowledge, right? So, but this is not there in Vedanta. It's not there in Ramanuja's system, right? The soul, ego itself, is an ethical entity in Vedanta, right? So, a fortiori, God in Vedanta is essentially primarily the exalted ethical. Unless God were so, he could, this is a footnote that we're reading, he could not be the object worthy of love, for as much as he is characterized as Ananda, or bliss, in the Vedanta. We're going back here to where we started that footnote. So, even the stage to which the idea developed in Jesus the Christ's days is still by 10 centuries green. It is scientific to conceive the cosmos as ceaselessly progressive, and therefore evolution need not be imagined as making an exception in the case of religion and philosophy. So he believes in the evolution of thought also, the evolution of philosophy. Their progress, therefore, cannot be arrested by the Near East, Palestine. So it's not that these people who are Semitic, Abrahamic, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, right? Their philosophy seems to be stuck in stone from what they've learned from the books that they have from the Middle East, from the Near East. He calls it Palestine, right? But he's saying that Vedanta is constantly fresh. If the conservative Christ be combined with the progressive Ramanuja, in whom the germinal of the Veda finds its finale, the world is all the more a gainer. So he's suggesting this. He's suggesting that Christians should read Ramanuja, and in fact, we have many Christian scholars who read Ramanuja and who will find Ramanuja quite refreshing, right? The collective reason of all religions, so transmitted in history, becomes the common heritage of all mankind. So then he has a 10th point here. Okay. As the man of the Near East, Palestine, Jesus the Christ was found ready to direct construction when northern barbarians pounced upon and destroyed the classical Roman Empire. The son of Ramanuja rose on the horizon of the Middle East, India, to direct construction when trans as well as cis Himalayan influences, such as the Persian, Assyrian, also it is said, Semitic, and Buddhistic, and all their congeners had well nigh sublimated the classic Vedantic Brahmanism. Okay, so he's comparing Jesus and Ramanuja. He's saying that Jesus arose when there was a destruction of the classical Roman Empire was about to be destroyed by the Huns and the people that came from the north, right? And Ramanuja's philosophy arose like a sun, right? To shine light when classical Brahmanism, Vedic Brahmanism, had been sublimated by Buddhist, Semitic, and Persian incursions into India. In this constructive work, Ramanuja had also to contend against absolute monism. So not only did Ramanuja have to defeat the Semitic and the Persian and the Assyrian and the Buddhistic ideas, but he also had to refute Advaita Vedanta, the classical absolute monism, right? And ergo, consequential non-ethical character liable to be imputed to Godhead, right? So again, he's bringing this point about God being ethical, into which Vedism had been volatilized, right? So by Shankaracharya had given this Advaita Vedanta, which basically wipes out, it's almost nihilism, landing it in nihilism. Nihilism means nothingness, right? And he had also to establish the personality of Godhead as standing in the most intimate relationship to the ego or soul, for the redemption of which divinity maketh repeated loving sacrifices. So Ramanuja also had to point that out, right? Which is not given any emphasis in Advaita Vedanta. Ajayamano Bahuda Vijayate, which he points out comes from the Vedas in the Purusha Sukta. That is, i.e., incarnations, right? These incarnations or avatars of the Lord come down, Paritranaya Sadhunam Vinashaya Chaduskritam Dharma Samstapanataya, in order to give the mercy of the Lord to the people by saving the good people, by destroying the demoniac people or destroying their demonic mentality, and establishing religion. Righteousness, ethical religion. And in order to prepare the same ego or soul, right, for sweet eternal service comporting to its will. So when he says it, he means the Supreme Brahman, Sriman Narayana, right? So what the Lord is doing by giving his grace is he's preparing us for moksha, which is eternal kainkarya or service to the Supreme Lord in the spiritual abode. His 11th point here is Ramanuja also found that men in his days had swerved from the Unitarian conception of God, right, hidden under poetry, myth, and trope in the archaic Vedas, right? And it was therefore his evangel to converge onto this Unitarian focus the divergent lines of thought which had emerged from the Vedic source, directing them to the conception of divinity, neither polytheistic nor pantheistic. Okay, so polytheistic means that it's not the Vedas are not polytheistic. They're not telling us about many gods, to worship many gods, and they're not pantheistic. They're not telling us that there's a god of the rock and a god of the river and a god of the mountain, like that, right? They're not. They are, in fact, Ramanuja's philosophy is neither polytheistic nor pantheistic. It is a type of panentheistic monism, monotheism, a type of panentheistic monotheism. So therefore, neither deistic nor theistic. Deistic means where God is too transcendent and he doesn't have anything to do with this world. He just creates it and then he just lets it go, right? He's too deistic, deism, right? Which is very much like Judaism and so, to a certain extent Christianity and Islam. He is deistic. He's there, but he's not immanent. It emphasizes the transcendental nature of God, but not the immanence, right? Nor theistic emphasizing the immanence. So Ramanuja's philosophy balances all these things. Neither monistic nor dualistic, neither deistic nor theistic, neither polytheistic nor pantheistic, but in fact panentheistic, but a happy synthesis of all the essential features that gave these their names in a monotheistic unity, Bhagavad Dharma. Philosophic, come religious, come means with in Latin, so intellectual, come emotional, intellectual with emotional, philosophic with religious, and unity of Godhead, in short, necessarily ethical and sufficient unto salvation. Also, okay, so we have some, Cardinal Newman held that the Christian church borrowed this doctrine from India. About incarnations, about avatars. God is Ananda or love, Anando Brahma, and therefore he's translating Ananda as love. It can mean bliss also. Anyway, so incarnates to give and invoke love. Incarnation implies vicarious suffering, right? Read Purusha Shukta and Tandya Mahabrahmana. Okay, so he's quoted from those different places. And he's giving the quotes here for Ramanuja's Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Sri Bhashya, and Gadya Traya, right? Which is what I said, that Ramanuja gives all these Ananta Kalyana Gunas, unlimited auspicious qualities in the beginning of his Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Sri Bhashya, and in the beginning of the Gadya Traya in the Sharanagati Gadya, which is the first of the three Gadyas, Gadya Traya. Okay. Advent 9. Okay, so if we want to really know about God, God comes in the 9th chapter, the 9th avatar, the 9th incarnation, the 9th avatar of this book. Ramanuja may already be discovered. The latest evolution of theistic inquiry embodied in such works, for instance, as Professor C. Fraser's Philosophy of Theism, in which the three primary data, ego, soul, matter, and God, are elaborately considered, which are the three Vedantic tattvas, which is none other than Ramanuja's three postulates of existence, the tattva traya. This is what we call in our philosophy tattva traya, the three tattvas, or the three principles: Ishvara, Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. Chit, Achit, Ishvara. The soul, matter, and God. Right, articulatedly epitomized in the Yatindramata Dipika. So these are going to be explained there are different chapters on them. Ranadi writes, as a matter of fact, both before Shankaracharya's time and after his death, the modified Advaita system of Ramanuja, modified Advaita is what he calls it, Vishishtadvaita, system of Ramanuja had played a great part in Indian philosophy, and it may be traced to the rise and progress of Vaishnava sects throughout India. So all the other Vaishnava sects that we see, right, have sort of come out of those, have come out of Ramanuja, have come out of Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita philosophy. Which sects have attained to higher and truer concepts of theism than any of the other prevailing systems? So we can see the Vaishnava sects, all the different Vaishnava sects have attained to a greater understanding of theism, right? A higher and truer conception of theism than any of the other prevailing systems. Again, he says, the threefold postulates of existence, Chit, Achit, Ishvara of Ramanuja, are thus seen to be distinct and yet harmonized together. All attempts to assimilate and reduce them into one absolute existence fail because they are bound to fail, right? We can't assimilate. This is what Adi Shankaracharya tried to do. He tried to assimilate Chitta Chitta and Ishvara into one homogeneous Brahman, impersonal Brahman, which has nirguna, no qualities. At the same time, they are not distinct in the sense that of being disjoint parts of a mechanical whole, right? So at the same time, they're also not just totally distinct. They're not totally like in Dvaita or Madhva's philosophy. They're not totally separate. They are one, and yet they are many. Vishishta Advaita. Vishishta Advaita. His 12th point here. Christianity is, and here we had a footnote for something here. Let's see where it is. The footnote mentioned here is Hebraism or Hellenism is in a restricted sense, according to Matthew Arnold. Semitic comprises of Islamic, Chaldic, Akkadian, Egyptian, Judaic, and Christian faiths. Dravidian comprises all the Turanian branches. Aryan includes Persic, Vedic, Grecian, Roman, Celtic, Teutonic, Slavonic, Christian. All the three, Aryan, Semitic, and Turanian, are thus engirdle the world. Chaldic, Assyrian, is suspected to be Aryan, and Judaism also, when traced through the Essenes and the Ebionites. The Essenes were original ancient Hebrews, I guess we can say, Hebrew sect. Dr. Dushan has thus justified. So interesting. Okay, so we're going back to here. His 12th point: Christianity is a happy combination of Semitic and Aryan culture, right? So all those different things, right, in the direction of religion. But Ramanuja later came to unify the Dravidian, right? Also including the Bhagavata Credo, which is par excellence, right? And so it continues on here a little bit more about the ideas of J.M. Kennedy in his Religions and Philosophies of the East, page 6, observes, one cannot but marvel at the impudence and conceit of the Christian missionary who goes to, say, India, after a short course of training and straightaway proceeds to confute with specially prepared arguments the doctrines of a belief devised by a much superior class of men, a belief, indeed, to which Christianity itself can easily be traced. And the third footnote here, Reverend Dr. Miller of Madras asked the British Christians to bear in mind that God was at work in India long before any missionary, Catholic or Protestant, set his foot there, right? So then Ramanuja is saying here above, Ramanuja later came to unify the Dravidian. Under Dravidian, he gives this footnote. Dravidian includes the two branches of Vaishnava and Shaiva. The Dramida or Dravida Bhashya of the Brahma Sutras. Ramanuja mentions in his Sri Bhashya, he mentions different authors that came before him and commented on the Brahma Sutras. Bodhayana, Tanka, Dramida is one of them. Dramida, right? Dramida is also called here Dravida. Dramida or Dravida Bhashya on the Brahma Sutras, referred to both by Shankara and Ramanuja, seems to be an ancient commentary, but its very name, Dramida or Dramita or Dramita Charya, anterior before to Ramanuja, but posterior to Shankara, Procrustean methods seems to have been prevalent, but Ramanuja gave true proportions by showing how the radical conceptions of God involved in such terms as Shiva, Hiranyagarbha, Indra, Agni, etc., were all implicated in the comprehensive term Narayana. See chapter 9 on God. Okay, so that's just about Ramanuja uniting the Dravidian, right, and also including the Bhagavata credo, right, because the Bhagavatam, even the Bhagavatas means the devotees of God, but even if we take it as being the Bhagavata credo from the Bhagavatam was a South Indian text, which is par excellence, right, and concerned with the closest personality of divinity. There is thus a holy trinity realized in Ramanuja, which fuses all the world faiths into a universal system. The Theosophical Society, also, which sits enthroned in India in Madras too, where Ramanuja's work largely lay, stripped of all its occultism and esotericism, coupled with other Vedantic movements, may be taken as the most obvious evidence proving the fulfillment of Ramanuja's work. Ramanuja's work is what Bacon wrote. Quote, all partitions of knowledge should be accepted, rather for lines to mark and distinguish than for sections to divide and separate, so that the continuance and entirety of knowledge be preserved. And his very small 13th point is, under the auspices, the riches are presented to the world. Under such auspices, the riches are presented to the world, contained in the compendium, the Yatindramata Dipika, right? And then he signs it, Alkondaveli Govindacharya Swami. Veda Griham was the name of his house in Mysore, South India, 2nd of February 1912. Okay, so that finishes the preface of the second edition, or the first English edition by Alkondaveli Govindacharya. Now we're not going to go through the edition of Govind. We'll refer to the edition of Alkondaveli Govindacharya, but since it has such archaic English in it, we're going to use the more modern version of Adidevananda of the Ramakrishna Mission of 1949, and that will be better. But the first part of Yatindramata Dipika is the invocatory verses, which I believe are only translated, which are not translated by Alkondaveli Govindacharya, but only by Adidevananda. So we'll have to, I think next time we can start with the invocatory verses in the other edition. So that was a bit long-winded, but I thought it was interesting. Some of the things about the author, about Apaya Dikshita not being able to prove that the word Narayana means Shiva, the story about him, and some of the other points that he was making there, and how he really felt that the East and the West, that Ramanuja's philosophy is a universal philosophy, and therefore people from the West also could be included and could take up Ramanuja's philosophy, and that they will actually find it to be much superior to the Abrahamic and Semitic religions that they were following, and that there was a link between these things. So there was many good points that he pointed out there, and so I really appreciated that. He also wasn't a fanatic. He was a royalist. He wasn't against the British ruling India, and he felt that he could see, it was mentioned in Vishnu Purana that the British would rule India. So some interesting points in his preface. If there are any questions about the preface or the two prefaces that we've gone over, we can deal with them. Otherwise, we can start the book in the next session and first of all look at the opening Mangalcharanam points and go on. Yeah.
No, Swami. I'm okay.
Yeah. Some difficult English, yeah?
Very, very, very.
Yeah, archaic. It reminds you of reading Bhaktisiddhanta. Yeah, but that's the way people used to write in those days.
But you explained it very nicely. That I appreciate very much. Because you make it easier for us to understand.
Yeah, so, I mean, I had to look up a lot of the words too. Juju.
When you were studying it yourself.
Poor parlor. Juju. What do these things mean? I had to look it up. Okay,
anyway,
so we leave it?
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Namaskaram. And next Tuesday, you do this again.
Yep.
We dive into the avatar, the first avatar.
First avatar, yeah. Unless, again, it's interesting in the other thing he said in the preface is you can start with the fourth one. If you really find it boring, start with the fourth one and do that. And start with what's been proved and just read that. And then go back to the study of pramanas. And my wife and I, who studied this for a year from a person called Anantanam Simachari in Sri Rangam, we also found the first three parts to be extremely difficult in the sense of being boring and whatever. But it's I think that's the way to do it, is to actually go through it step by step,
systematically.
Even though he says if you find it boring, you can skip to chapter 4 and read the rest of the book and then come back at the end.
Okay.
So we'll see.
All right. Thank you so much, Swami.
Bye.